Atmospheric fall. We're losing a lot of blood. Suction. Get the blood away. Not from the rupture. Get the paddles. Get the paddles.
There's no alcohol.
A man who had 2 4-inch square swabs left inside him during a stomach operation.
Lucky to escape paralysis, Susan Williams was sent home with a broken neck.
Police believe it's possible some addicts were prescribed methadone.
But instead of sending the drug through a tube into his arm, she injected it through
Ministers from the Department of Health have asked for a full report.
Surgeons from the Bristol Royal Infirmary were struck off following...
69-year-old remains in intensive care after having the wrong kidney removed.
There seems to be an epidemic of medical malpractice. There seems to be no end to stories of apparently incompetent doctors and their terrible blunders on patients. Yet most doctors see themselves as healers and lifesavers, devoted to keeping us healthy. Only quacks and incompetents make mistakes. Weed out the lackluster medics and the profession will once again have a clean bill of health. Or will it? A disturbing new picture is beginning to emerge. Incompetent doctors are only the tip of the iceberg. Mistakes are being made at every level. But admitting any error is a medical taboo. The myth of infallibility and the fear of litigation means no doctor wants to talk about the day they harmed or killed their patient. This series attempts to break the mold. It's brief, to persuade doctors to break those taboos, to tell openly the stories of their mistakes and how they might have been prevented. Unless they do, tens of thousands of people will die from preventable medical mistakes.
He came back to me, this doctor, later and said, well, that patient's still in pain. And I said, well, I thought you told me to give it to that patient. He said, no, it's patient next door.
I got the order of those 2 syringes wrong. One was a syringe just to speed the patient's heart rate up a little bit. The other one was a syringe to paralyze the patient.
The trace didn't really change, but we realized right at the end of the labor that suddenly the baby died.
Eventually it turned out that this needle had gone right into one of her major arteries and she was bleeding internally.
He attacked this girl's thigh in such a way that he actually caused considerable damage to the skin.
Because I was looking from the back, you always look at x-rays from the front, and of course I put the needle in the other side and his lung collapsed.
Medicine is in crisis. The actions of a number of doctors and surgeons have fractured the bond of trust between medics and their patients. Now the government is forcing change. It's introducing league tables for hospitals and performance reviews for staff. The profession is under the cosh. It sounds like the stuff of revolution, but it's unlikely to change a thing. Clamping down on incompetent doctors and underperforming hospitals makes good headlines, but it won't stop medical errors from happening. The problem is too widespread and fatally misunderstood. Great Ormond Street is the world's most famous children's hospital. It's built a reputation on expertise and excellence. In 1997, 12-year-old Richie William was getting regular chemotherapy treatment there. He had lymphatic cancer, but had responded well to treatment. When doctors first diagnosed the cancer, Richie's mother, Dolores, had been terrified that her son would die. But now she felt he was through the worst of his illness.
He was on the path to recovery. He was in remission, and so things were looking up. It was great, you know, we decorated his bedroom, and, you know, he's even gone back to school for a few days.
In July of 1997, Ritchie was due for his last course of chemotherapy. The treatment consisted of 2 drugs, vincristine, which would be injected into his arm, and methotrexate administered directly into his spine. The anaesthetist, John Lee, who had no experience in chemotherapy treatment, injected both drugs into Ritchie's spine, including the highly toxic vincristine.
The minute the drug was injected into Ritchie's spine, he started complaining of pain immediately and started crying. Dr. Lee stopped giving the injection for a couple of minutes. The nurse with us was talking to him. She'd bent down and was trying to console him, and I was patting him and saying, it's okay, it'll only take a minute and it will be over. And then John Lee continued giving the drug, vincristine.
It was a tragic and irreversible mistake. Ritchie was discharged to Lewisham District Hospital, where he lay in agony for 3 days. On the Monday morning, he was readmitted to Great Ormond Street.
I was asked to go into a room and meet some doctors, and I got in there and I was really surprised because Dr. Mann, who's the head of oncology, was crying, and I couldn't believe it. And I smiled, and he said he's really sorry. It's been the most terrible tragedy. And Ritchie had been injected with this drug, vincristine, and he was dying.
Ritchie died in agony 2 days later. Dr. John Lee, who'd given the fatal injection, was charged with manslaughter. Was it just another tragic case of incompetence by a doctor who deserved everything the courts would hand out? To this point in his career, Dr. Lee had an impeccable record. Had he simply been negligent, or was he part of something bigger that lies at the heart of medicine? To answer that question, we must first look at how common medical mistakes are, and how many doctors are making them.
Every doctor makes mistakes. I'm sorry, but everyone does, including nurses. If you're writing prescriptions, doing calculations, drawing up drugs, making up solutions, there is a possibility of error. We double check, we treble check, maybe even more than that, but no system is actually foolproof. There will always be a level of error at some point.
Every single doctor who's practiced for any time at all has made serious errors, serious mistakes, and I think that's a very terrifying thing for doctors. They all know about it, they all empathize with it, and it's often very difficult to talk about it even to other doctors, let alone to the broader world, to patients.
So if all doctors are making mistakes, to what extent? What constitutes an error? And should we be looking for individual doctors to blame? Information is thin on the ground, hardly surprising with such a wall of silence surrounding medical mistakes. In many cases, hospitals don't even keep proper records of mistakes, and there's no central office for data to be collected.